Names often carry the weight of history, but, few are as steeped in legend and misplaced ambition as that of Argentina. When we think of this vast South American nation, we might picture tango dancers in Buenos Aires, rugged gauchos on the Pampas, or the dramatic landscapes of Patagonia. But the country's name doesn't come from any of these things. It doesn't honor a revolutionary hero or an indigenous word for land of many rivers. Instead, it points to something far more elemental and alluring, a treasure that was never actually there. The story of how Argentina was named is a fascinating journey back in time, a tale of desperate explorers, shimmering myths, and the powerful allure of silver. The mystery begins with a simple question: why Argentina? The name sounds elegant, almost poetic. It seems to roll off the tongue with a certain European flair. This is no accident. The name is derived from the Latin word for silver, argentum. This immediately raises another question: why name an entire country after a precious metal? The answer lies not in the ground beneath modern-day Argentina, which was not particularly rich in silver, but in the fevered imaginations of 16th-century European conquerors. They were men driven by a potent cocktail of greed, faith, and a relentless desire for glory, and they had heard stories, tantalizing whispers of a mountain made entirely of silver, waiting to be claimed. This origin story is a classic example of how myth can become reality, at least on paper. The early Spanish and Portuguese explorers who navigated the treacherous waters of the South Atlantic were not just cartographers and soldiers, they were treasure hunters on a continental scale. They were following the incredible success of Hernán Cortés in Mexico and Francisco Pizarro in Peru, both of whom had uncovered vast riches in gold and silver. It seemed perfectly logical to them that another, perhaps even greater source of wealth must lie hidden somewhere in the unexplored southern lands. This belief was so powerful that it began to shape their maps, their reports, and ultimately, the name of an entire region. The naming of Argentina is therefore not a story of discovery, but one of expectation. It's a testament to the power of a rumor. The explorers were chasing a ghost, a legend born from a misunderstanding between cultures and fueled by an insatiable European appetite for precious metals. They named the land for the wealth they hoped to find, not the wealth they actually found there. This makes Argentina's name a unique historical artifact, a permanent monument to a myth. It's a name that promises a specific kind of treasure, one that would lead men on perilous journeys up a wide, muddy river they fittingly called the River of Silver, or Rio de la Plata. To truly understand the story of Argentina's name, we must transport ourselves back to the early 16th century. This was an era of unprecedented change and boundless ambition in Europe, particularly in Spain. The Reconquista, the centuries-long effort to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Moorish rule, had concluded in 1492. In that very same year, Christopher Columbus stumbled upon the Americas, opening up a new world for conquest and exploitation. The Spanish crown, newly unified and hungry for resources to fund its European ventures, saw a golden opportunity. A generation of men, hardened by war and eager for fortune, was ready and willing to set sail into the unknown. These were the conquistadors. They were a complex mix of soldiers, adventurers, and zealous missionaries, all operating under the banner of the Spanish Empire. Their primary motivations were often summarized as God, gold, and glory. They sought to convert indigenous populations to Christianity, claim new lands for the Spanish crown, and perhaps most importantly, enrich themselves beyond their wildest dreams. The tales coming back from the Americas were intoxicating. Reports from the expeditions of Cortés and Pizarro described empires laden with gold, silver, and precious stones, fueling a continent-wide treasure hunt that would reshape the globe and lead to the brutal subjugation of native civilizations. When the Spanish first arrived in the region that would one day become Argentina, they were not the first Europeans to see its shores. The Portuguese had already explored parts of the Brazilian coast, and in 1516, the Spanish navigator Juan Díaz de Solís sailed into the vast estuary that separates modern-day Argentina and Uruguay. He was searching for a passage to the Pacific Ocean, a western route to the Spice Islands of Asia. Instead, he found a wide freshwater sea he called the Mar Dulce, or Sweet Sea. His expedition ended in disaster when he and several of his crew were killed and reportedly cannibalized by the local Charrua people, a grim welcome to a land that promised so much. Despite this violent beginning, the allure of the region only grew. The survivors of the Solis expedition brought back not just tales of danger but also something else: silver trinkets. These small pieces of metal obtained through trade with indigenous groups were the first tangible proof that the legends might be true. Where did this silver come from? The local people didn't mine it here. They pointed westward, toward the interior of the continent, toward the towering Andes. This simple act of pointing a finger set in motion a chain of events and a myth that would define the region for centuries to come, giving both a river and a future nation their silver-lined names. The whispers began as fragmented stories passed from one explorer to another, growing more elaborate with each retelling. They coalesced into a powerful and enduring legend, the myth of the Sierra de la Plata, the Mountain of Silver. This was not just a story of a rich mine, it was a vision of a mountain literally made of pure, gleaming silver. According to the legend, this mountain lay deep in the heart of the continent, guarded by powerful indigenous kingdoms. It was a source of unimaginable wealth, a prize that would dwarf even the treasures plundered from the Aztecs and Incas. For the Spanish conquistadors, the Sierra de la Plata was the ultimate jackpot. The legend found its most influential early proponent in Aleixo Garcia, a Portuguese adventurer who was shipwrecked with Juan Diaz de Solis. Stranded on the Brazilian coast, Garcia learned the languages of the local Guarani people. They told him tales of a powerful white king who ruled over a land of immense silver wealth far to the west, in the foothills of the Andes. Determined to find this kingdom, Garcia gathered a force of some 2,000 Guarani warriors, and in the 1520s led an incredible overland expedition. He trekked thousands of kilometers through dense jungle and hostile territory, eventually reaching the outer edges of the Inca Empire in what is now Bolivia. Garcia and his men did indeed find silver. They raided Incan settlements and managed to amass a considerable amount of treasure before being forced to retreat. Tragically for Garcia, he was killed by his own allies on the journey back, but the survivors carried the silver with them. When they finally reconnected with other Europeans on the coast, the silver they presented was electrifying proof. Here was physical evidence that the stories were true. The legend of the Sierra de la Plata was no longer just a rumor, it was a verifiable quest. The silver they carried was, ironically, from the mines of Potosi in Bolivia, the true silver mountain of the Andes, but the explorers didn't know that yet. This proof ignited a silver rush. Expeditions were launched with the specific goal of finding the land of the White King and his silver mountain. The most famous of these was led by Sebastian Cabot, a Venetian explorer sailing for Spain. In 1526, he entered the great estuary discovered by Solis. Hearing the amplified stories of Garcia's treasure from local inhabitants, Cabot abandoned his original mission to find a route to the Pacific. Instead, he renamed the estuary the Rio de la Plata, or River of Silver, believing it to be the main artery leading directly to the legendary mountain. This act of naming was a declaration of intent, cementing the myth onto the world map. The connection between the name Argentina and the Latin word for silver, argentum, is the central pillar of this story. In the 16th century, Latin was the language of scholarship, science, and cartography across Europe. It was the universal tongue for educated men, including the poets and mapmakers who would play a crucial role in christening the new lands. While Spanish conquistadors on the ground might speak of Plata, the Latinized form, argentum, carried a more formal, classical, and enduring weight. It elevated a gritty quest for treasure into a matter of high geography and epic poetry, fitting for an age that saw itself as a continuation of the Roman Empire's legacy. The transformation from the Spanish Plata to the Latinate Argentina was a gradual process, driven by the desire to give the region a grander, more permanent name. The term La Argentina first appeared not on a map, but in a poem. In 1602, the Spanish cleric and poet Martín del Barco Centenera published an epic poem titled La Argentina y Conquista del Río de la Plata, con otros acontecimientos de los reinos del Perú, Tucumán y Estado del Brasil. The title itself is a mouthful, but the key part is La Argentina. In his work, del Barco Centenera used this poetic, Latin-derived term to refer to the entire region surrounding the Rio de la Plata. This was a pivotal moment. A name born of myth and greed was now immortalized in literature. Poetry in this era was not just entertainment, it was a way of chronicling history, celebrating heroic deeds, and shaping public perception. Del Barco Centenera's poem, though perhaps not a literary masterpiece, served as a powerful piece of cultural branding. It took the informal name associated with the river and the legend, and gave it a formal, lyrical identity. La Argentina sounded far more majestic than the province of the River of Silver. It suggested a land of destiny, a place worthy of an epic poem. From the pages of poetry, the name began to seep into the work of cartographers, map-makers in Europe, who relied on chronicles and reports like Del Barco Centenares, started to adopt the term. Early maps began to label the vast, largely unexplored territory inland from the Rio de la Plata as Terra Argentea, or Terra Argentina, the Silver Land. This was a powerful act of creation. By putting the name on a map, they were giving concrete form to a legend. The land was being defined by the treasure it was supposed to contain, a classic case of the map shaping the perception of the territory, rather than the other way around. The legend of the Sierra de la Plata was not purely a European invention. It was really a complex fusion of indigenous myths and Spanish desires, a story lost and found in translation. When the first Spanish and Portuguese explorers arrived on the coast, they encountered various groups, most notably the Guarani. The Guarani were a semi-nomadic people who inhabited a vast territory stretching from what is now Paraguay into Brazil and northern Argentina. They were master storytellers, and their cosmology was rich with tales of mythical lands and powerful beings. It was their stories, filtered through the avaricious ears of the conquistadors, that formed the basis of the Silver Legend. The Guarani spoke of a land without evil, a kind of earthly paradise where people could live without suffering or death. They also had active trade networks that extended over incredible distances, connecting them with peoples living closer to the Andes. Through this trade, they acquired small amounts of silverwork, crafted by the sophisticated cultures of the Incan Empire. To the Guarani, these silver items were valuable and exotic, but to the Spanish, they were a sign of something much bigger. When the Spanish asked where the silver came from, the Guarani pointed west, telling stories of a powerful king who ruled a mountain of this shining metal. This white king, or Rey Blanco, was likely a reference to the Inca emperor, known as the Sapa Inca. The Inca Empire, centered in the highlands of Peru and Bolivia, was indeed fabulously wealthy in silver, particularly from the mines at Potosi, which would become the Spanish Empire's most valuable asset. The Guarani, who were often in conflict with the Incas, may have exaggerated the wealth of their rivals, or perhaps the Spanish simply heard what they wanted to hear. They conflated the Guarani land without evil with the Incan mountain of silver, creating a single irresistible legend of a silver paradise ruled by a white king. This cultural misunderstanding really highlights the profound gap between the European and indigenous worldviews. For the Guarani, the stories were part of a rich oral tradition, blending myth, history, and practical knowledge of their neighbors. For the Spanish, the stories were literal clues on a treasure map. They stripped the tales of their cultural context and boiled them down to a single motivating factor: the location of precious metals. The indigenous peoples, in their attempts to explain their world, or maybe even to mislead the intrusive foreigners, inadvertently fed the very obsession that would lead to their own conquest and displacement. The journey of the name Argentina from a poetic flourish to an accepted geographical term was solidified on the parchment of European mapmakers. In the 16th and 17th centuries, cartography was undergoing a revolution. The discovery of the New World created an insatiable demand for new maps, and the printing press allowed these maps to be reproduced and circulated more widely than ever before. These maps were not just scientific documents, they were instruments of power, propaganda, and commercial speculation. What they chose to include, or leave out, had real-world consequences, and naming a place was a fundamental act of claiming and defining it. Following the publication of Martin del Barco Centenares' poem in 1602, the name Argentina began its slow but steady infiltration of European cartography. One of the earliest known maps to use a variant of the name was produced in 1602 by the Portuguese cartographer Bartolomeu Velho. His map labels the region as Terra de Prata, Portuguese for Land of Silver. Soon after, Latin versions like Terra Argentea appeared on maps printed in Amsterdam and Venice, the great centers of European map production. These maps depicted a vast, mysterious interior, often with annotations referring to the legendary silver mines and the powerful kings who supposedly ruled there. These maps were wildly popular in Europe. They were studied by monarchs, investors, and would-be colonists, all of whom saw the potential for immense profit. The name Argentina, emblazoned across a still uncharted territory, acted as a powerful advertisement. It promised wealth and invited investment and further exploration. The fact that the Great Silver Mountain remained elusive did little to dampen the enthusiasm. The name itself was enough to keep the dream alive. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy in reverse. The land was named for silver, so explorers kept coming to find the silver that must be there. This process really illustrates how colonial powers use naming as a tool of appropriation. By labeling the land Argentina, European mapmakers were overwriting millennia of indigenous geography and history. They were replacing local names and understandings of the land with a name that reflected their own economic ambitions. The map became a canvas on which the colonial dream was painted. The name stuck, not because it was accurate, but because it was useful. It served the interests of the Spanish crown and the explorers who sought to claim the land in its name, forever linking the identity of the region to a European legend of treasure. For centuries, Argentina remained a poetic and informal name for the region. The official administrative name given by the Spanish crown was the Viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata, established in 1776. This vast territory included not only modern-day Argentina, but also Bolivia, Paraguay, Uruguay, and parts of Brazil. The name was functional, bureaucratic, and tied directly to the river that had first drawn the Spanish inland. The more evocative name, Argentina, continued to be used popularly and in literary circles, but it held no official status. It was a nickname, a holdover from the age of myth and conquest. The transition from a colloquial nickname to an official national name began with the winds of revolution in the early 19th century, inspired by the American and French revolutions and spurred by Napoleon's invasion of Spain. Creole leaders in Buenos Aires began to push for independence. On May 25, 1810, they formed their first autonomous government, an event now celebrated as Argentina's National Day. In the years of struggle that followed, the revolutionaries needed a name for their new independent state. They were forging a new identity, separate from Spain, and they needed a name that could embody that aspiration. Several names were used in the early years of independence. Official documents referred to the United Provinces of the Rio de la Plata or the United Provinces of South America. However, the name Argentina kept resurfacing. It was used in patriotic songs, in political pamphlets, and in the national anthem, written in 1813, which refers to the Argentine people, Al Gran Pueblo Argentino. The name had a powerful appeal. It was distinct from the old colonial designation. It was rooted in the land's earliest history, even a mythical one, and it sounded grand and aspirational. It was the name of a nation, not just a colony. If you're finding this journey through history as fascinating as I do, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the stories behind the world we live in. The name was finally and formally adopted in the Argentine Constitution of 1826, which officially designated the nation as the República Argentina, or the Argentine Republic. Although the country would cycle through other official names during periods of political turmoil in the 19th century, including the Argentine Confederation, the 1853 Constitution reaffirmed Argentine Republic as a permanent official name. The myth had finally triumphed, becoming the official, legal, and enduring identity of a modern nation-state. The story of Argentina's name is a perfect encapsulation of how colonial ambitions shaped the modern world. It began with the raw greed of European empires, a lust for precious metals that drove them across oceans and into unknown lands. The name Argentina is a direct product of this desire, a name literally meaning land of silver, bestowed upon a place not for what it was, but for what it was hoped to be. It is a stark reminder that the very identities of many nations are rooted in the economic projects of their former colonial masters. The naming was an act of possession, a branding exercise for a massive imperial venture. Yet, over time, the meaning of the name has been transformed. What began as a symbol of foreign greed has been reclaimed and repurposed as a powerful symbol of national identity. Argentines today do not associate their country's name with a failed treasure hunt. Instead, Argentina evokes a rich and complex national culture, the passion of tango, the literary genius of Borges, the vastness of the Pampas, and the fierce pride of its people. The origin story, while fascinating, has been absorbed into a much larger and more meaningful national narrative. The name has shed its colonial skin. This transformation shows the resilience of identity. A name imposed from the outside can, over generations, become an authentic expression of the people who bear it. The Argentine people have filled the vessel of their country's name with their own history, their own struggles, and their own triumphs. The silver of the original legend may have been a myth, but Argentines have forged a different kind of national wealth, a cultural, intellectual, and social richness that is entirely their own. The name's connection to Argentum is now more of a historical curiosity than a defining feature. In the end, the surprising origin of Argentina'S name serves as a powerful lesson in how history is made and remade. It shows us that names are not static labels but living things, imbued with the meanings we give them. The journey from Argentum to Argentina, from a conquistador's dream of silver to a citizen's sense of home, is a testament to the enduring power of people to define themselves on their own terms. The treasure the Spanish were looking for was never really there, but in its place a proud and vibrant nation grew, one that has made the name Argentina truly its own. What's the most surprisingly named place you've ever learned about? Share its story in the comments below.